I'm Jeremy with Poindexter G, and today we're going to talk about Benjamin Tyler Henry. Now, what Benjamin Tyler Henry is known for is the Henry repeating rifle, the first really successful lever-action repeating rifle ever made. This was made in 1860 and started getting out into the market in 1862. Now, the history with Mr. Henry starts well before that, where he started working with some local gunsmiths and eventually ended up hooking up with these two guys named Horace Smith and Daniel Wesson. Yes, that's Smith and Wesson. Now, before they got into the revolvers that would end up becoming their bread and butter and a thing that would end up making them famous, they were working on something else, and that was the Volcanic pistol and the Volcanic rifle. Now, these worked a little bit differently than the cartridges that you're used to. What this was basically just a ball at the front that was hollowed out inside, and that's where the powder would be put. So basically, you take the hollowed out round, fill it full of powder, put your primer at the end of it, and that was the entire round there. You didn't have a case on it. They hadn't come up with the idea of a case yet. Now, while this did work, it ended up being a little bit problematic for two reasons. Reason number one, because it was hollow, you lost a lot of weight and a lot of mass on the projectile. And also because you didn't have a whole lot of room to put the powder in, it ended up being a pretty small powder charge. Altogether, ended up making just not a lot of energy coming out of it, and it always ended up being kind of an anemic round on there. And so this whole company just kind of comes and goes. It's going under, it's not going well. Smith and Wesson just both kind of abandon it, and it was another guy, Oliver Winchester, that comes into this thing and ends up taking up the remains of that company. Picks up that, also hooks up with our friend Henry, and the two of them get to going together on it. Now, Winchester was not a gun designer or a gunsmith. He was just a businessman. He had made most of his money making shirts and just happened to know a bit about firearms, got involved with some firearms designers, was basically the money behind it. And this is what we have here with Winchester being the money man and Henry being the gun designer. Two of them got together and they started up New Haven Repeating Arms, because what they did was they took that Volcanic design and came up with a lever action rifle based off of that, and that would be the original Henry rifle, or the 1860 Henry as it is known as. And that thing really took off, but instead of using those rounds that they were using in the Volcanic, they ended up using regular cased ammunition, pretty similar to what we're used to today. It was specifically the 44 Henry rimfire cartridge that was used in it. And this thing really takes off and becomes a huge success. It starts making its way a little bit into the Civil War and some things afterwards, but really very, very successful rifle. And of course, after they designed it, they ended up making a patent on that 1860 Henry. And since he was, working for the company at the time, Henry did not put it in his own name, but he also didn't put it under the business name of New Haven Repeating Arms. He put it under Oliver Winchester's name. This will be important. Remember that. It's basically Henry's redesign of this Volcanic design that he had worked on previously with Smith & Wesson that ended up really making the thing popular. And he kind of felt that he was really not getting his fair share of the money from it, that he was doing more and more of the work with that, and Winchester was off hanging around in Europe and not really being involved with the company, and he was still getting all the money from it, and Henry just became more and more frustrated over this. And eventually it gets to the point that Henry goes to the courts to try to get control over the New Haven Repeating Arms. And so he goes to court with that. He's able to go to the judge and able to prove his case that he should have this company. And he ends up getting the New Haven company. So he owns the company now. What he does not, however, own is any personal property of Oliver Winchester. And since the patent for that 1860 Henry was in fact in Oliver Winchester's name, Oliver Winchester kept that patent. That was not the company's patent. They were using Winchester's patent just under his permission. And once Henry got control of the company, Winchester simply revoked permission to do that. In addition to that, Winchester was able to get all of the items related to it there, all the documentation on it, all the tooling and parts related to it, because he wasn't going to let Henry, who was now in charge of New Haven, do that. So basically, Henry ended up getting this business that he had some facilities and some stuff and some people that could work for him, but he had nothing that he could make. And the big main product that they could make, he could not do. And of course, Winchester ended up making his own company, Winchester Repeating Arms, and he ended up taking that original 1860 Henry design and had someone else rework it for him. Now, working for Winchester was a guy named Nelson King, who came up with a major improvement for that Henry rifle, which was the loading gate on the side of it, which meant that instead of having to load it at the end of the rifle in this awkward way, you just had this loading gate on the side that you could just drop rounds right into. Interestingly, for some reason, and I'm not sure if it's because he knew what went down with Winchester and Henry, or if it was something else, King ended up keeping that patent in his own name. And for years, up until that patent expired, King's name ends up next to his patent there on all of the Winchester rifles. It's just on there along with that original 1860 patent that was technically owned by Oliver Winchester. And Winchester continued to have success with that original design. He also had John Moses Browning redesign the whole thing with the Model 1886, and it just made a whole line of Winchester lever guns there that ended up being massively huge, and to this day, what the Winchester Company is still known for. And unfortunately, our friend Benjamin Tyler Henry never really got the full benefits from his design that he had come up with. But he never got the type of money or success from the design that Winchester ended up getting. He worked as a gunsmith until late in his life when he died in 1898. And of course, Mr. Henry's original employers there, Horace Smith and Daniel Wesson, were able to get a hold of Rollin White's patent for the bore-through cylinder, which ended up making the cartridge revolvers a possibility, and they took off after that. So it seemed like everybody that Henry worked with ended up getting successful and making a lot of money, and he never really did. The modern day Henry Company is really not related to that. They've just managed to get the rights to the name, but they're a completely separate company that's not attached to him. So there never was, like I said, there never was really any success for Mr. Henry, unfortunately. So if you found that video interesting, be sure to give it a thumbs up and a like. You can go down into the comments section and leave me your thoughts down there. And you can also subscribe to my channel to make sure that you catch all the videos that I post and not miss anything. I'm Jeremy with Poindexter G, and we'll see you next time.